welcome this afternoon and or this morning, depending on where you are connecting from. And we are glad that you are able to join us for part 2 of this webinar presentation on mental health in congregations. As you know, the webinar is recorded, and so we invite you as you share this afternoon, whether in chat box or open questions, that you do keep that in mind. Also, you are invited to post questions and or comments into the chat box. Remember that when you type something in there, please make sure that it is earmarked for, you've clicked on the Everyone tab so everyone can see it, and then hit enter. Because if you don't hit enter, we can't see your wonderful comments and questions. And so we will have that as well. Also, because of the webinar format that we're doing today, we will ask you to mute your mics until you may be invited then to share in some open mic questions, and also to turn off your video camera on your system, so that way we will just be seeing our presenter and also facilitator online. Thank you. So the webinar today is co-sponsored by Discipleship Ministries of the Church of the Brethren and the Anabaptist Disabilities Network. And it is my privilege to introduce to you Jean Davies, who is the Executive Director of the Anabaptist Disabilities Network. She is a graduate of Bethany Theological Seminary and has done training in disabilities work. And so it's her vision in which we have this presentation today, and we're delighted that Jean can facilitate the conversation that will take place here today. Jean?
Thanks so much, Stan, and thanks to the Church of the Brethren and Stan for running tech for us. I really appreciate that and hosting us. I am delighted actually to have a second webinar. We had a webinar in June on mental health in congregations with Janelle Bitikofer and how congregations might be supportive of people who experience mental illness. And time went by so quickly, and there were so many questions and so much interest that we decided to have a part 2, a follow-up with a little bit more concrete suggestions about how we go about supporting people. Janelle Bitikofer is the author of Streetlights. It is a wonderful book that is a very detailed manual about how to support people who experience mental illness, how we do that together as congregations. She's also the executive director of We Rise International, and as a part of that ministry, directs an initiative called Churches Care. And Churches Care is a training for leaders in congregations to help their congregations understand how in their particular congregation they can support people who experience mental illness. So thank you so much, Janelle, for being willing to come visit us again.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm glad to see people popping on here, and I'm delighted. I know some of you have come back from the first webinar and others maybe are new. Can you hear me fine? Yeah. Okay, well, I'm gonna just—
Yes, we can.
You can. Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, I'm just going to open up my PowerPoint and try to share my screen, and then we'll jump right into it. I will say this is going to be a fairly interactive. I'm going to give you a lot of information, but there's going to be times where I'm going to ask you to jump in and put some things in the chat or answer some polls, and then we're going to have a time of discussion, question, and answer at the end. So, but let me try to open up the PowerPoint. Hopefully I can find it. That's not it. None of these things are it. Hold on. Here it is. All right. I need it to come up. There we go. Nope. There we come. All right. Great. So the topic that we decided to focus on today was providing understanding and mutual support when people experience, I'm just going to put this down because it seems like it's slowing us down. Here we go. When people experience mental illnesses in our churches and communities. So that's what we're going to talk about. Jean sort of already introduced me. I guess the one thing I would add is that for those of you who attended the June webinar, you already know that I have my own history of experiencing depression when I was in college, and sort of my work in mental health, which has been over a period of 20 some odd years, working in all kinds of areas of mental health and addictions, sort of came out of that experience of mine as well. And I attend Laurel Street Mennonite Church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So are you able to see the words at the bottom of my screen, Stan, or is this in the way? Am I screen sharing?
I can see your bar at the bottom of the screen. I can see down to where it says a Q&A discussion of why and how we take, but I can't see beyond that.
That's what I was afraid of. Okay, well, we'll just move that then. All right, so what we're going to be, thank you. Not sure why that has to show up there, but so what we'll be covering is an overview of some key issues that we should be thinking about when we're thinking about it, supporting folks who are experiencing mental illnesses or mental health struggles in our congregation. We're going to talk about an overview of support strategies, and then, like I said, we're going to have some Q&A and discussion. I will say this is a mental health and addictions, mental health webinar, but addictions are pretty similar. So a lot of the things we talk about related to mental health could also be important to think about when you're supporting someone with an addiction. Now I'm having trouble again, Stan, with moving it forward. I don't know why this happens in these webinars. Here we go. All right. So just a quick overview what we mean by mental illnesses. We're talking about things like major depression, bipolar disorder, PTSD, eating disorders, any kind of psychotic disorder. We've got a couple of those listed on the right: schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. There's a lot of other psychotic illnesses actually that people don't know much about unless you're a mental health professional. Seasonal affective disorder is another type of depression. Postpartum depression is another type of depression. Panic disorder, panic attacks. There's just all kinds of different mental illnesses. So we're just talking about the broad gamut of mental health symptoms and struggles that somebody might have, and how do we support people in those situations. Trying to move along to my next slide. There we go. All right. So I think we went over some of this in the first webinar, but I just want to cover it a little bit of it again. That I'm going to move this because it's in the way. But 1 in 5 U.S. adults live with a mental illness. So 1 in 5. So 1 in 5, and that's also true in your churches. It hasn't been shown that there's a lot of difference in the numbers between folks who attend a church and don't attend a church. Although churches, because of the social supports and the spiritual supports, can help be preventative factors for people, but the 1 in 5 number is pretty much true across the board. So we know mental illnesses don't discriminate. Christians get mental illnesses just like other people do. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US. It's the 2nd leading cause of death in youth and young adults. So be alert to your youth and young adults. Only half the people with a mental illness receive treatment. This is a really unfortunate statistic because people who receive treatment tend to feel a lot better and tend to resolve a lot of their symptoms and are able to more get back to life. And those who don't receive treatment tend to struggle for long periods of time. You can see the next bullet, 11 years is the average length of time that many people go experiencing symptoms of a mental illness before they get into treatment. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe they don't really realize they have a mental illness. Maybe they are worried about the stigma. Maybe they don't know where to go for help. There's a lot of different reasons for that, but certainly it's a shame because if people had gotten into treatment, they would have felt better for probably 10 and a half of those 11 years instead of having to wait that long to start feeling better. So this is one reason why in the church, we do want to be encouraging people to get support and get into mental health treatment as well when they need it. And then just you can see down here at the bottom, 25% of people who experience a mental illness say that the first place they reached out to for help was not a treatment provider, a mental health treatment provider, a doctor, a counselor. It was a local church. And this, again, is why we really want to be making sure that the church, we are prepared and know how to support people. Trying to get my PowerPoint to move. Sorry, y'all. This was something we had experience on this last time. I'm not sure why, but we'll see if it'll move forward again. In the meantime, I just would encourage churches to be thinking about that 25% of the people who experience a mental illness may be coming to your church seeking support. And some of those folks are already in your church, right? Maybe it's you, maybe it's someone else in your church, or maybe it's just someone who thinks churches provide hope and support. And so they're coming to your church. And they may just come sit in the back row, and they might not even mention that they're having mental illness symptoms, that they're just looking for support in your church. So those are some things to think about. I'm going to stop and reshare this because I don't know why it's taking so long. Let's try that again. This is strange. I don't know why we have had this problem. Jean, do you want to try it on yours, or shall I continue trying it on mine?
Sure, I can try it on mine. Let me try sharing my screen here. Let me get it up first.
Okay. I'll try to go to the next one before you share your screen. Let me know when you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
I apologize, everyone. This is very unusual. I use this PowerPoint in other places and it seems to go fine. So we're just having some technical difficulty, but I'm sure we'll resolve it shortly. In the meantime, I'm just gonna, while you're pulling it up, Jean, I'm gonna just keep moving forward with the information. And actually, Stan, the next thing is the poll.
Okay.
So I wonder if you could send out the poll to everyone.
Okay, and here it comes.
Okay, so this poll is confidential. We just want to get a basic understanding of where everyone is who's on the webinar today, to get some basic information that we can all talk about together about how the church is doing in supporting people. So again, this information, when we share it with the group, is not associated with your name or your church. It's just a confidential poll. So if everyone can fill that out, that would be great.
And there are 2 questions to this poll.
Right, yes, thank you. It's so great to answer both those questions. I see responses are coming in, which is great. Thanks everyone for filling that in. We'll just give you another 30 seconds maybe for that. Then we'll look at the responses and Stan, and we'll talk about those.
Okay.
All right, I think everybody's mostly got their responses in. Do you want to, do you need to open up the results? Okay, share results. Here we go.
There we go. Here are the results.
All right, can everyone see the results? Can anyone let us know in the chat if you can see the results, just to make sure? Yes, okay, I see some yeses. Wonderful, great. Okay, so we can kind of see the first question was, how do you think your church does with supporting people in the church who experience mental health symptoms? And it looks like B and C were the ones that most people selected. B is, I think it depends on the situation. And C is, I think our church could do better at this. And then D, we have 7% down there as well. So we had 43% on both of those. I think it depends on the situation. I think our church could do better. Both had 43%. 7%, I think some people have felt unsupported in our church. And I think all of these responses are wise responses. You know, in a lot of churches, there is a lot that we could do to do better at this. And then I do think people respond differently based on different situations. So that's true. And certainly we do hear, as a mental health professional, I hear from a lot of folks who have a mental illness who have felt unsupported in a church, which is one reason why we do webinars like this, and why I do Church's Care Program and other outreach, because churches have such great intentions. So we want to be making sure that our intentions are being lived out in a way that's understood as supportive and is helpful to people. So, and I know that's everyone's goal. The second question we have here, I will just say, I noticed nobody checked. We do a great job and really walk with people closely. So that's interesting that nobody selected that one. So everybody's willing to be on the learning curve, which is great. Question number 2, how comfortable do you think most regular attenders would be in talking about their mental health struggles in your church? And nobody said comfortable enough to talk about it openly in front of the congregation. And then we got 79%, which is the majority of you, have said comfortable enough to talk about it with only a small group of people, or maybe just the pastor. And I think that's probably true in a lot of churches. That's kind of where we are, that it's not something people talk about real openly, but maybe with 1 or 2 people or the pastor, some people might feel comfortable. And then we have a list of not everyone. Let's see, we have 21% says not very comfortable. These topics are rarely openly and supportively discussed in our church. And then the last one, no, sure, no, we don't have anybody on that. So I think these are pretty accurate of most churches, you know, that in a lot of cases, maybe people are comfortable just with a small group or not very comfortable at all. I saw a chat message from Eric. Those were tough questions in my setting. I know of people struggling who have shared with me privately, but do not do so with the whole congregation. I think some prefer to handle it on their own. Some don't want to burden others with their struggles. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think stigma is a big factor there. You know, a lot of people prefer to deal with mental illnesses and addictions on their own, not because they really want to deal with them on their own or feel like they've got it under control, but because they feel like it's a stigmatized topic that is really not okay to talk about. And so they're not sure who is safe. I hear that from a lot of folks as well. So thanks for everyone for filling out the poll. I think you guys are an educated and knowledgeable audience. Here we have another comment from Jane. I've seen this struggle not just with the person with the mental illness, but with the family as well. That is definitely true. Many times the family also doesn't feel confident and comfortable that if they share openly about a struggle with mental health in their family in the church, that they will receive encouragement and support and not a stigmatized response. That's a good point. Jean, can you take us to the next slide? Ah, that's working much better. Wonderful. So yes, good. We've got some other comments real quick. I'll just look at those. Thanks to everyone who's putting comments in the chat. Some people just want to keep things private, same as with physical illnesses, not always because of stigma. That's true. That is true. But I would also encourage us to think about how many people would feel comfortable sharing they have cancer in your church, but if they had bipolar disorder, they definitely would, same person wouldn't share it. That's where we can see the stigmatized piece, I think. So if they're totally comfortable sharing or fairly comfortable sharing about a commonly occurring medical condition in the church, but not a mental health or addictions issue in the church, that's where we're seeing that stigma. But you're right, there are some people, especially in the older generation, who don't share about any of those things because all of those things were topics that were off limits in the churches as they were coming up. I see that in my personal life apart from my role as a pastor. Yeah, yeah. So here's some statistics, some more statistics. Knowing that mental illnesses are common in society and our churches, what's the experience that people often report when they seek help from the church? In 2013, this study by Lifeway Research, and I really don't think the stats have changed much since then, said 55% of the respondents, it was a nationwide survey, 55% of people surveyed who did not currently attend a church, and 21% of people who did currently attend a church said that they did not think a church would welcome them if they had a mental illness. Now, both of those statistics are concerning, but I think the one at the bottom is more so to me. 21% of people who did currently attend a church still felt that if they had a mental illness, they would not be welcomed. And then the general population is the 55% out there who may not have been attending a church. So this is, again, why we want our churches to be increasing our ability to make people feel welcome and provide them with support when it comes to mental illnesses and addictions. Jean, can we go to the next slide? Wonderful. So a lot of people say to me, I'm not exactly sure how to support someone who's experiencing a mental illness. I'm not really sure how we can make our church more accessible or how we can support people individually. I think the answer is in Luke 6:31. I think if you're ever having an interaction with someone who has a mental illness and you're questioning, like, is the interaction I'm having the one I should be having? I would always just ask you this question: am I doing to them what I would have them do to me in this same situation? And most of the time you're going to come up with the correct answer of what you should do in that moment. Not always, but most of the time. But so we're going to talk about making change in our entire church, which is sort of the first thing that we need to do in order to make our churches more welcoming and helpful and supportive for people with a mental illness, and then supporting individual people we'll talk about separately. Also, I feel like I should say, for those who weren't in the original webinar that we did in June, I use the term mental illness because most people who are experiencing mental health symptoms are having a diagnosable mental illness. Some mental illnesses are like depression that are super common in the whole congregation, could have them. Anybody could have them. Also panic attacks, very common. So there's all different kinds of mental illness symptoms. So when we're talking about mental illnesses, we're talking about mental health challenges that people are having that may be long-term or they may be very short-term, but either way that they require some support. So the first thing we want to talk about is this idea of making change in the entire church. So I like to call that church-wide change. And if you want to go to the next slide, Jean will take a deep dive into that. Great, thank you. So here are just some activities that you can do. The orange words are the three categories that I would encourage all churches, if you want to sort of strengthen your response to mental health needs in the congregation and the community, to do these three things. Churches should actively and intentionally increase awareness about mental illnesses, reduce stigma, and normalize mental health issues as a situation that people can experience, and make support available and share support resources. So we want to talk about each of those, and we're going to break them down. So with the first one, increasing awareness, mental illnesses and mental health struggles are common and treatable. This is the message that people need to know. They're common and they're treatable. Because a lot of people get a mental illness or get mental health symptoms and they just feel terrible and they don't realize there's hope out there because they don't know this is a common problem that a lot of people have. You can seek help and help is available, and that you can feel better, and that is the goal, is to feel better and not continue to struggle. So increasing awareness about mental health and mental health treatment is important. The next thing is reducing stigma and normalizing mental illnesses or mental health. So normalizing is just a technical term for making it clear that this is something that happens to a lot of people, that you're not different. So we want to be getting out the message: you are not broken, you are not to blame, you're not a bad Christian. Having a mental illness is not a sin. You're not different than the rest of us, because anybody in this congregation could develop a mental illness at any time. And many people in this congregation, 1 in 5 probably, have experienced or are currently experiencing mental health symptoms. So you are not different. And there is no shame in experiencing mental health symptoms or struggles. If we can get that message across, that's half the battle in people being less afraid to step forward and seek help when they need it. And then the last section that we want to focus on. Even the pastor, amen, Eric, definitely the pastor, definitely, and the pastor's family, who often also feel that they're held to a higher level of expectation to be perfect and okay and fine when maybe they're not always feeling that way. And then the last thing we want to do as an entire congregation, as a church body, is we want to make support resources available and share those resources. And we want to help people get linked to resources. So we want to ensure that there's procedures in place. Yes. Ensure that there's procedures in place for accessing support, as well as shared and repeatedly mentioned distributed information about that. You know, if we distribute information once, that's going to be real helpful for anyone who's having a mental health symptom on that day, but it's not going to be helpful to the people who start mental health symptoms 3 months later. So we need to repeatedly be talking about these issues in our churches, and that there's help available. Jean, can we go to the next slide, and then we'll dive a little bit more into each of these and what it looks like to operationalize this in your church. So here's some possible ways to increase awareness. And while we're going through this, I would just encourage, if you have ideas of other ways that you've seen churches reaching out to increase awareness about just the fact that mental illnesses exist, that mental health is something that affects people, that there's help available, stick those ideas in the chats just to share them with other people in this webinar. What are ways that we can increase awareness in the church? So here's some that I would just suggest. Providing education. So that's what we're trying to do. We're providing education to the congregation about mental health topics and addiction topics. A mental health minute is super awesome and super easy thing to establish in your church. In my church, we have a health minute, which sometimes is physical health and sometimes it's mental health. So we have a health provider in the congregation, or someone who's knowledgeable about the topic goes up and just talks for 5 minutes about, you know, hey, if you experience these symptoms, it means you could be having a stroke and you should, you know, reach out to a medical provider and take it seriously, and you know, that sort of thing. Or they can talk about depression or ADHD or whatnot, just to sort of get the information out there to the congregation that these are things that we can talk about in our church. You know, if you have church publications, you can include mental health articles in there. I've just written a couple of these for some of our larger denominational magazines, but you can also, and I think it's really better even, to put it in your church. If you have a church email list that goes out once a week, or a church publication that goes out once a month to the congregation, put some information about mental health in there from time to time. You can have mental health events, you can have speakers, you can have people like me come talk, you can have people share from their own experience if it's a safe thing to do in your church and they won't be stigmatized. There's all kinds of local people who would come in and talk about mental health, any kind of topic really that you want in your church. And then I think it's important to remember that the education needs to be adaptable to each age group. Your youth group needs to hear these messages. The young adult groups need to hear these messages. They are all at high risk for suicide. The children also need to hear about mental health. You know, if you're sad, what do you do? Can you talk to someone? Is it okay to be sad? Is it okay to be nervous and scared and anxious? And what do we do when we feel that way? You know, that's mental health. And we can talk about it in every age group. Certainly adults can talk about it in Sunday school classes and a lot of other places. But it's good just to think about each age group in the church and how can messages about just awareness about mental health and that it happens and it's something that's normal be in the church. Yeah, so I'm seeing in the chat the issue that sometimes it's hard to find treatment, and that is true. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, David, about like some places to find counseling and treatment in your community and ways to figure out how to do that. Because in some communities, that can be a real challenge. I know here in Lancaster right now, it can take 1 month to get in with just about any counselor in Lancaster, and that's really tough. If you're feeling really bad and you really need to talk to someone, you don't want to wait a month. So then you're left with going to the emergency department or waiting a month. You know, that's not good. So we want to make sure that people do know how to get connected, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. Good to bring that up. Here we have Peter is saying, here's a way of increasing awareness. On several occasions, I have shared in a sermon about my mental health history and how it has intersected with my faith. In every case, there have been multiple people who have come up afterwards to share their stories. Thank you so much for saying that. This is this is exactly what we should be doing. The reason why is because people, if it comes from the front of the church, then people believe it's a church sanctioned message. You know, they're not just hearing it from their friend in the pew, but someone from the front of the church has brought out this information that mental illnesses and mental health struggles can happen to anyone. And that if they happen to you, we need to support each other in the church, and our faith can still live on in the midst of that with support. So that's great. Eric is saying in our community it is pretty much impossible to find treatment. Our local mental health facility is seen by the community as a joke. Well, that's not good. Well, I have some resources that might help you. Yeah, you're right. That is a big concern. And so I have some resources that may help you that we'll talk about a little later. So this is how we increase awareness. Feel free to keep putting in here ideas of other ways that you've seen churches increase awareness and provide education. I will say one way we'll talk about at the end that Jean mentioned is I did write a book about this. It is Education for Churches. It's called Streetlights. And you can find out more about that at streetlightsbook.com. And the first 6 or 7 chapters of that are like an adult Sunday school guide on the topic of mental illnesses and addictions. And then there's just a lot of like hands-on, how do we support people stuff for pastors and congregation members throughout the rest of the book. So that's another option, but there's lots of ways to increase awareness. And so please go ahead and keep putting those in the chat. And then I would like to move on also at the same time, Jean, to the next slide, where we'll talk about reducing stigma. Thank you, Jean. Yes. Okay, so here I wanted to just talk about, as far as education, sometimes churches worry, well, we really don't usually talk about mental health in our church, so we're not exactly sure how to bring up this topic because it's just not something we've talked about a lot before as a congregation in our church and our Sunday school classes, etc. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic that has affected everyone's mental health. Everyone in your congregation pretty much has had some kind of mental health response to the pandemic. Either they've been stressed, they've been anxious, they've been depressed, they've had a loss, they're dealing with grief, they're just feeling very uncertain. Some people are feeling angry. All of these are mental health responses. And so this is a really awesome time. It's like the pandemic has kicked in the door of our churches and opened that door so that you can talk about mental health all you want, because everybody is experiencing some kind of a mental health response. This is a great time to say, hey guys, we want to acknowledge that the pandemic over the last year and a half has been tough on everybody. We want to talk a little bit about mental health and emotional well-being, because all of us have had some struggles from the pandemic. And this particular slide, some of you have seen in the last webinar, we're talking about trauma, a lot of trauma and loss and just fears and nervousness that have come from the pandemic. Trauma is like a speeding train. If we don't talk about it, it gets worse on its own. It continues to grow and causes depression and PTSD and all kinds of other mental health issues. So when we've had these emotional struggles that have been caused by the pandemic, we need to talk about them with someone who cares and will listen and will acknowledge that, yeah, this has been rough and difficult. And this is a great thing to do in the church. Boy, the church is really, honestly, the only organization I can think of in the world that automatically already has small groups of people that meet together regularly to talk about things, and a large group of people that meet together weekly to talk about things. Well, we in the church are in the best possible situation to talk about mental health and to really educate people in our churches about mental health, because we've already got all of these things set up to talk in groups about important topics. So it's important for us now to be supporting each other and picking up the pieces and talking about the pandemic and how it's affected us, how it's still affecting many of us and all of us, and just how we're dealing with that stress. That's a great way to jump into discussions about mental health and then continue them about other mental illnesses that will have and will continue to happen before and after the pandemic as well.
Janelle, I just want to let you know time is flying and it's 1:36.
Oh goodness. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, so this is key. For people to feel comfortable enough to reach out and seek mutual support when they experience a mental illness or addiction, we need to actively and continuously make our churches safe places to talk about and acknowledge that we're struggling with mental health or addiction symptoms. If we don't, people won't talk about them, right? Because it doesn't feel like people are going to encourage them, doesn't feel like people are going to support them. They're not sure if they're going to get a negative response from people. They're not going to reach out and talk about it. And that's 1 in 5 people in your congregation who are not feeling comfortable to talk about it. So if we can go to the next slide, that would be awesome. We want to talk about reducing stigma and normalizing mental health. This is super, super important. And you've already talked about this a little bit. So you want to talk about and normalize mental health struggles from the pulpit or the front of the church. This is, I would say, the most important thing that you can do in your church to make people feel more comfortable, to make people feel like this is an okay topic to talk about. And can you just push the button one more time, Jean? Yeah, and the reason why it's important to talk about it from the front of the church is because that gives people the impression that the church has approved this message. You know, again, it's not the person sitting with them in the congregation, it's someone up at the front, someone in charge, someone who has the authority to say, in our church, we acknowledge that mental health struggles happen to a lot of people and that they're really important, that there's help and hope available, and that we want to walk with you. So that's really important, and it's something that honestly does not happen in many churches. So thank you to the pastor who's shared that you've already done that. That is a scary thing to do, but it's super important. Even if it's not a personal story, just sharing about mental health from the front of the church is probably the most important thing you can do to reduce stigma. And then we want to talk about and normalize mental health topics and the importance of mutual care in all of our groups in the church, small groups, disciple groups, Sunday school classes, youth group, children's Sunday school, we've talked about that. And we want to get the message out that mental health struggles and addictions too are a part of many people's lives, including many Christians' lives. You are not broken to blame, you're not bad, you're not evil, and there is no shame in experiencing mental health symptoms or struggles. These are seemingly basic concepts, but they're really important, and they're not actually talked about that much in our churches. The next thing I'd like to do is go to the next page and talk about this idea of when stigma does show up, which it will in your church, how do you stomp it out? I just want to take a quick a quick moment to memorialize these Japanese lantern flies. Those of you who are from Pennsylvania, I'm sure, are probably well versed in the Japanese lantern fly. Those who are not from Pennsylvania, you might not have seen these guys yet, and you hope that you never do, because they're so beautiful, but apparently they kill all the trees in particular types of trees. And so all over Pennsylvania, people of all political backgrounds and all religious faiths and all different types of people are stomping on these poor little lantern flies when we see them, because we've been told by the Ministry of the Interior that we need to stomp them out, and otherwise they multiply, as you can see in the picture to the left, and they cause a great deal of damage to the environment. So this is the same thing you want to do, even though we may feel bad about stomping on the lantern flies. When it's stigma that creeps up in your church, it's really important to stomp on it calmly without creating an international incident. But you want to come up with a way to quickly and effectively respond to it and change that behavior or that response that people are getting, whatever it is, so as to make your church a safer place in the church. And what I would like to do, I know we're a little short on time, but I would just like to encourage if people could just put in the chat examples of what might be something that might be a stigmatized response that people might get in the church, like maybe something people might say to someone, or something that people might do or not do related to a mental illness situation in the church that would make someone feel stigmatized. Because there's a lot of examples, and sometimes we don't really even think about what they are. But it is important to think of a way then to respond to them. Aha, that's a great one. That's one of my favorites. Deb says, struggle with depression over 10 years. People always say, pray harder, trust God. Yeah, I know. I don't know how many people I know, but quite a few people I know who were told by their church leaders or people in church that if you have a stronger faith, you wouldn't have a mental illness. This is not true. And it is very detrimental to say that to someone. Yeah, telling someone just think positive, that doesn't actually prevent mental illness symptoms, although it can make you, a positive person. But or proof text scriptures like God won't give you more than you can handle. Right. So these are exactly. Oh goodness, that's a good one. Yeah, people will say that too, that kind of thing. And that's like an accidental stigma, right? I'm so fortunate that no one in my family has a mental illness. Someone might say to someone like, oh, wow, I can't believe you're dealing with that. That must be so hard. I'm so grateful that no one in my family has a mental illness. What that's doing is that saying like, but for you guys are dealing with a mental illness. That's a stigmatizing thing. It isn't actually in the Bible. We were just talking about that, Tim, before you guys came on, about like suicide, for example, being a sin is not in the Bible. It's not in the Bible at all, because it's not something that is considered a sin by God, but it is something that the church has often given that messaging about. Yeah, that's a big one. And this is something we don't do, right? Stop interacting with someone because you feel like they're being negative, or just because you're scared of the situation. Some people will just like back away and sort of accidentally abandon that person because they don't want to be part of dealing with the mental illness. Yeah. So these are great examples. You guys are on it. Real quick, just maybe pop in what are some ways to respond to sort of these things? If you see them happening in your church, what would be some proactive, positive ways to stomp out that stigma in a way that would be beneficial and sort of redirect, but in a loving way? I think sometimes, while people are thinking about that, I think sometimes you can just make a statement, that kind of redirects the situation. Like if someone has said, I'm so grateful that no one in my family has a mental illness, and you happen to be standing there as a part of that conversation, you could always say something like, yeah, but you might not even know, because so many people are afraid to talk about their mental health symptoms, and it's so common, 1 in 5 people. So almost every family, somewhere in the extended family, someone might be struggling. It's a common thing to struggle with a mental illness. You can put normalize, you can do that sort of thing. Can to act normal. Yeah, specifically reaching out to people experiencing a mental illness, being open to talking to them about the mental illness, but also talk about other things. Thank you, Jean. See them as a whole person, right? They're a sister, a daughter, a mother, a coworker, artist, great singer. What else are they besides their mental illness? And how can we talk about all of those things as they're a whole person? That's great. Recognize positive contributions of everyone and highlight them. And I would say don't highlight them in a way like, even though you have schizophrenia, it's amazing how you do art in the church. Thank you. Like that's probably not the way we want to do it, right? Affirming them, letting them know they're welcome, providing a space for them to participate fully. Yes. So these are all great ways. And sometimes with the stomping the stigma, unfortunately, we have to redirect other people in the church and provide them with this sort of supportive education so that they don't accidentally continue stigmatizing people in the church. Affirming them, yeah, great. So let's move on to the next. So you guys are on it, you've got it. Let's move on to the next page if we can, and feel free to, you guys, keep sticking things up there. Help the stigmatizers know that mental illness is indeed a medical condition. Amen. That's really important. And education is key. Yes. And this is why, again, we want to do church-wide education, right? Rather than having to interact with each single person in your church who might be accidentally stigmatizing someone else in the church with mental illness. If you educate the whole congregation, you're going to get a lot farther without having to do that one-on-one as much. And then we want to just talk about this, making support resources available. So if we can go to the next slide. Hopefully. Yeah, so here's a few ways to do this, and I would love people to go ahead and put in the chat other things that you've done, and people can read those, or that you've seen done, or that you might think might be helpful about how do we make support resources available, just even helping people find a counselor. How do we make that information available? So here's a couple ideas I had. Post a list of mental health and addiction counselors and treatment programs and support resources in an accessible place. And this is key. Regularly remind everyone in the church where to find it. Because again, if you tell them once, You tell them once a year on World Mental Health Day, the whole rest of the year, they might not know where to find it. So got to remind them regularly. You can put it on a bulletin board, put it on the website, wherever. It's also helpful to mention mental health and addiction support resources regularly in the bulletin or other weekly or monthly communications. Why? Because that's where people get most of the information. And that's a repeated source of information that's coming out all the time. So even if you just have one little asterisk somewhere in a line at the bottom that says, if you need mental health support, call Joan Smith, you know, that's great. Or remember, there's mental health resources on the back bulletin board over by the bathroom. We encourage everyone to utilize those resources and reach out to the pastoral leadership team if you need additional support, blah, blah, you know. Have an official support system and plans in place. This is super key. Have an official plan in place for when someone in the church experiences a mental health or addiction struggle. Not if, but when, because there's lots of people. Probably you could go to your congregation now and there's 20 people who probably need this support and just haven't maybe asked for it. So this should include a combination of church-based support as well as referrals and linking to professional treatment, which sounds like you guys are already trying to do, which is awesome. Some churches do provide mental health and addiction or other types of grief support groups, etc. If your church can do that, that's awesome. If your church is not sort of at that level, that's okay. It's important to refer folks to community resources and then provide that sort of wraparound love and support and follow up in the church. Can we go to the next slide? So just a note, yeah, and please keep putting information in the chat of ideas you have to share with other people. Churches can develop a congregational care plan that includes mental health, yes, and addictions, I would say both. That would be awesome. That's what you should do, is have a plan and have it written down and make sure people know that there's a plan. Because if only the leadership team knows there's a plan, the congregation isn't going to come forward when they need that help and resource, because only the leadership team knows that there's a plan, right? So just a note here, churches are great at providing support really once they're trained and ready to go, because church congregations already have more systems and human resources in place to provide this kind of support than any other group of people on the planet. Churches are the only organization that has all these support systems that could be put in place pretty easily. And people experiencing mental health or addiction symptoms do need our wraparound support. They need spiritual support, social support, emotional support, and then that medical treatment piece with a professional, not with us, with a professional mental health provider.
No, we have 10 minutes.
Okay, let's just zip on to the next real quick and see what's next. Do we have 10 minutes to the end or 10 minutes to the end of the presentation? To the end, okay.
10 minutes till the end.
All right, oh no, all right, sometimes we're not sure how to provide individual support. I would like to just actually open up to some questions, because I have some information on that, but I'd like to just hear what your specific questions are in the group. So if you have specific questions on how do we provide individual support, so this is how you can change the whole church and expand the support, but how do we provide individual support? I would encourage you to go ahead and put those questions in the chat. Meanwhile, Jean, if you could go to the next slide real quick while people are putting those questions in. I'm going to skip this poll. All right, while people are putting those questions in the chat, just a reminder that mutual support means we're in this together. The person that you're supporting is not lesser than you. We're a team. Today I support you, tomorrow or yesterday you're going to support me, right, with something else. I'm going to contribute in this way in the church, and some other day you're going to contribute in some other way in the church. It's mutual support. So we want to become knowledgeable. We want to pay attention to what's going on around us. If you see that someone appears to be struggling, ask them directly and listen without judgment, and then show you care and tell them you care, and then act like you care by getting involved in supporting them or connecting them to the right people to do that. Normalizing, we already talked about that. Helping them connect to support and to professional treatment. That's really, really important. You can provide them all the support in the world, but if they really need meds for their depression, they need to see a professional. If they're having panic attacks, you can provide them all the support in the world, but if they don't see a professional, they're probably still going to keep having panic attacks. So we want to be providing support in the church and also linking to treatment. walking with them on the journey. It's not like you refer them to treatment and now you're like, good luck, best of luck, let me know how it went. You know, we want to walk with them and just check in, have coffee, those sorts of things. Stick with them, keep learning with them. They might be learning if they're new to mental health, they may be learning, you can learn with them. And then just make sure to support their support people. Their loved ones are the ones who are responding to their needs at 3 a.m, taking them to appointments, asking how they're doing, responding to suicidal thoughts, all those things. We want to support those loved ones as well. I see people are putting good things in the chat. Let's see if there's any questions here. Yeah, refrain from a fix-it response and engage in active listening. Thank you, David. I think that's super important. I think the flip side of that, though, is if we just actively listen and we're like, wow, that really seems rough, but then we don't actually refer them to treatment, it's going to stay rough for a long time sometimes. So we want to make sure we walk with them, we listen to them, we support them, and we refer them to treatment and help them get in and follow up. Not sure about the American context, but it's Canadian where I have vaccine passports. I'm struggling with congregants who really want the passport shown on my desire not to turn people away from support groups. I don't think we've had that problem yet in the US, but maybe some folks have. Like, do people need to be vaccinated to come to your support group? That's a good question to be thinking about. How would you handle that? Yeah. Is it still the referral to treatment piece that gets difficult? Yeah, it is. How do we know how well different agencies and providers will be? I'll tell you a little secret. There's probably a whole bunch of people in your church who've seen a mental health provider. And if the pastor or the leadership team has been interacting with those folks, they might just ask, what's been your experience at that agency? Have you had a good experience? Would you recommend this agency to other people in the church? And if they say yes, put it on your list. You know, they're your behind the scenes experts. They know who's been helpful to them. Is there a particular counselor that's been helpful that we could recommend? You can put them on a list that way too. Jean, can you go move to the next couple of slides? I just want to also remind people that as people keep putting questions in, people do need help socially, emotionally, physically, or medically and spiritually. And here's just some ways to think about that. Socially is a big one, and we often forget this. You know, when someone has cancer or is pregnant or whatever, we might think about things like babysitting, rides to appointments, help with life tasks, but we don't always think about that when it's a mental health issue, but we should. Obviously, emotionally, encouragement, coffee chats, all those things are super important. And then linking them to treatment, and then the non-judgmental spiritual support. Click twice, Jean, and let's go down as we're continuing with the chat here. So this is one thing I just want to highlight to everyone. When you're helping someone, remember this should be a team effort. It should never be like one pastor and this person, and the pastor's going to get burned out possibly because this person might need a lot of support. Also, the pastor may not have all the skills that are needed to support that person. So it's good to have a team approach. Maybe you've got someone who has sort of mental health knowledge on the team. Maybe you've got someone who's their best friend on the team, who's the one who definitely sees them more often. Maybe the pastor's on the team providing the spiritual support. Maybe somebody who provides rides is on the team. You want to have a team approach. And you want to also remember your own self-care, right? Take care of yourself, put your own oxygen mask on before you try to help other people, while you're trying to help other people. Make sure if you're having any stress, mental health struggles, that you're talking to someone and getting the support that you need too. That way you don't burn out. Just looking at the things that keep coming up. One of the biggest struggles is in the family, the person struggling, lots of denial and blaming and refusing to listen, learn, and understand. Yes, and then the referral. So if you go down, Jean, to the next, let's see, couple slides down. One. Oh goodness, no, go ahead and pass that. So anyways, team approach. Different ways of doing teams. Okay, here, stop here at this one. So just down here at the bottom, here's some ways to refer people to mental health counseling. So most communities will have, well, yeah, it's hard to see on here. So people can call their insurance company and ask, you know, for a list of counselors in their area, but then they're kind of going in blind, right? They know that the counselor takes their insurance, but they don't know if they're going to be any kind of a good match for them personally. So that's one way to do it, but it's not always the best way, but it is a great way to use your insurance. You can also call your local community mental health. It sounds like in the one community that's not a really great option, but for many communities, you can call them and just say, do you have a list of referral agencies? And they can give you that. I often recommend to people this website, psychologytoday.com. It's not a faith-based website. It is just a regular website, but you can go on that website, and it doesn't matter where you live in the US. Unfortunately, it's not as effective in Canada, although there is one for Canada too, psychologytoday.ca, I think it is, .com maybe. But in the US, it's quite effective. You can go onto psychologytoday.com and you can write down the name, search by the name of your community, and then it'll give you a list of counselors in that community. And then you can search by what is the issue you're seeking help for. Maybe it's depression, or it's anxiety, or it's sexual abuse, or it's divorce, or it's autism, whatever it is. And you can it's just stress. I just want to talk to someone. It's been a pandemic, and you can search for it. And then so you can search there, and you can, sorry, I was reading within the chat. You can search psychologytoday.com for your location, your community, the issue you want described, and then down at the bottom of each counselor's page, it says what kind of insurance they take, so that the person can either choose one that takes their insurance or one that is self-pay. I used to have my own little page up on Psychology Today. Most counselors across the country have one, I feel like, on Psychology Today. And that's how you can find counselors that are in private practice. Maybe they're just working by themselves, or they're working in a small team. And that's a really great way to get connected. The other thing I love about Psychology Today is it has a picture of the counselor on it. It has a picture of their office. It has a little bio where they explain what their vibe is, how they like to work, what kinds of issues they like to help people address. And that way people can get an idea, oh, this counselor sounds like someone I would mesh with. I think this is the one I want to call. And then you can either call them, or you can just email them through the website and say, do you have any openings? Do you for sure still take my insurance? Can I get an appointment? So it's kind of easier to find counselors that way in your surrounding communities or in your community. Thank you, Stan. And then, again, the mental health services in your town should be able to deal with, if there's an emergency, you want to really go to the mental health services for emergency response, not directly to the ER if you can, or not directly to the police, but just to call the mental health emergency community mental health response usually. Let me just see. Yeah.
We are at time.
Oh, okay.
So
well, that answered some of the questions.
I want to honor our time.
Yes.
And give Stan a minute to tell people how they can get CEUs if you want to get CEUs for this webinar. And he probably has a couple of other business things to say. And then if people want to stay on and talk to Janelle and ask more questions, they are welcome to do so.
Yes, indeed so. We invite you to stay if that works with your schedule. However, if you are needing to leave and you're curious about the continuing education request information, for those of you seeking CEUs for this webinar, check the chat box. I have pasted the link to the form. You go in, fill out the form, hit submit, and then it will be sent, and we will have it processed, and you will receive a certificate in a PDF form that will be sent to you by Brethren Academy. So thank you for attending, and we appreciate your participation, all the wonderful questions, comments, and ideas that you shared today.
I just answered some of the questions there in the chat as well. But yes, thanks to everyone for all of sharing your ideas. I feel like you guys had great ideas and that everyone can learn from. I see their Focus on the Family also offers faith-based counseling referrals, someone said.
If you'd like to turn your camera on now too, we can chat.
I'm just going to put also in here, not all communities, but most communities have either a Mental Health America or a Nami or both in your community. Both of those provide free support groups, which can be really helpful to a lot of people. Nami also provides free support groups for family members. So if you have some, someone with maybe a loved one who has bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or severe depression or something, and they have support people or their family, they have support groups for the family and for the person separately. Oh, we didn't really address Eric's question. Is Eric still here? Yeah, about
Yes.
family. It's hard to get the family sometimes to be supportive and listen. I think that is true. What have you found as helpful in dealing with that, Eric? Do you have thoughts to share?
Well, no, I mean, I know a couple people, a couple families, and it's just, you try to talk to them, but they're just, it's hard to know what to share with them, or how to help them understand, because their denial or their shame or their embarrassment of their family member is just so deeply embedded. It's just hard to know what to say.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. I'm sure that is difficult with many families. But again, those families are being affected by the stigma, right? So the more that we can be talking in our churches, reducing that stigma and just making it clear, like, wow, mental illnesses are super common in most families. Honestly, 1 in 5 people, how many families have more than 5 people? It's pretty common in every family. I honestly have never met anyone who doesn't have a mental health condition in at least their extended immediate family. So it's very common, and just to maybe reducing that stigma in the church and in the community can really help. But then I think education, like you're saying, Eric, is good. How do we educate the family about that particular person, their needs? I think often stories can be helpful, like sharing personal experience, or, hey, I was working with someone else, not mentioning their name, and they were having a similar situation to what your son is dealing with. And what we did that was really helpful to them was we got them connected to counseling, and it was really great because they had this amazing, change in their life because their symptoms got better. And I just wonder if that wouldn't help your son too. And I'd really recommend, could we try that? And just kind of like telling some stories and giving examples can sometimes make it less stigmatized for them, and then they can hear you better. And also, I think people like to hear, like, oh, someone else had a similar experience and they got help and it worked for them. So maybe it'll work for your family member. Could we try that? Yeah.
Janelle, Sarah asked if Church's Care is only offered in Pennsylvania.
Right now it is, but we are working on that. We have been invited to come to New York City and to North Carolina. And we've had some interest expressed in Ohio. I don't know where you are, Sarah, but we're hoping to expand it to other places. But right now it is in, hi, Sarah. It's in Pennsylvania right now is where we have the funding to roll it out.
Okay, can I ask a follow-up question about that? Can you hear me okay? Okay, for the churches who participate, I saw that there was like a set price per person. Is the idea that just like a small group of people within the church would do the program, or is the hope that like a larger percentage of the congregation participates?
That's a great question. So yeah, I'll just maybe give a brief overview, because Church's Care is an 18-month capacity building program for the church. And we walk with you on mental health and addictions for a period of 18 months. So it starts with 2 days of sort of deep dive intensive training on mental illnesses and addictions, and how to understand them, what causes them, how are they treated, and how can we support people who are experiencing them. And that training is what you actually pay for. And then the rest of the program just comes along with it. So what we encourage is that probably two or so people from your church, however many your church wants to send, like church leaders probably, or maybe like a pastor and like the person who's most likely to be the mental health responder or addiction responder in your church or whatnot, that those couple people would come and then they get this deep dive training. And then they get some of the additional resources for 18 months, but then the congregation also automatically, through their participation, gets services for the rest of the 18 months. So what the Church's Care program provides, so the training for the church leaders, and then 18 months of clinical follow-up. So a lot of pastors, we know pastors are first responders. They are, y'all are. There's EMTs, there's nurses, there's social workers, there's pastors, and these are all first responders. So we know that often you guys are out there dealing with folks who are suicidal, out there dealing with folks who are having a lot of mental health issues, and you're like, oh my goodness, where do I refer them? What do I say? What do I think about? What are the risks? What do I need to do? How do we support them? So we provide a clinician, so a mental health and addictions dual diagnosis counselor, not to provide counseling for your church member, but to provide support for you. So you can actually set up a confidential conversation with the clinician. It's on a confidential Zoom platform, but it's not Zoom, it's confidential, HIPAA compliant. And you can just run by, hey, we've got this guy in our church and we're trying to support him and he's presenting with these symptoms and these issues and we're just not sure what to do and what should we be thinking about? Can you give us some suggestions? How do we handle this situation and provide support? So we'll walk with you in that. So you can actually meet with the clinician several times over the course of supporting that person to say, like, here at the beginning, what do we do? Okay, checking in, this is how it's going. What else should we be thinking about? These are new questions that have arisen, et cetera. So, and the idea with that is that it sort of builds the pastor's capacity, because now you're doing it, but you're doing it with support and help and that extra knowledge on board with you throughout that 18 months. So you can support multiple people in your congregation that way through those 18 months and learn a lot in the process, we hope, and not be out there alone, because that's not really fair. Y'all are not specifically trained in mental health and addictions necessarily. So we provide you somebody who is. And then also, there's networking with other churches. Like we have a Facebook page where people share, hey, our church is doing this special mental health event. Y'all are all welcome to send your congregations and join us in this, etc. Or, hey, I developed this great curriculum for 2 Sundays and I want to share it with everyone. Here it is. You know, contact me if you're interested in getting a copy. So we make a networking situation. And then what happens for the whole church is we have something called the church assessment, which is I'm kind of excited about it. It's a 13 questions, about 13 question poll that your entire church is asked to take. So everybody in the congregation is confidential poll. They take it online. You just go online and fill out the 10, 18 questions. How many questions? I think it's 13 questions. And then we get the responses about the questions and we meet with your leadership team and give you a report on the questions. On like the report of what the congregation said. So it has questions like, how comfortable do people feel sharing about their mental health with church leadership? Or how comfortable do people in the congregation feel referring someone else to treatment? Or do they feel that they've been supported if they've had a mental illness and things like that? So you can get feedback about how your church is doing, like real feedback from the congregation that they might not tell you, but they'll tell us. And then we bring it back around to you and sort of show, like, here's the strengths of your congregation in responding to and supporting people with mental illnesses and addictions and educating your congregation. And here's some areas maybe where you could strengthen. And then we provide you resources to do that strengthening. So one of those is my book, and then just we kind of share with you other ways to strengthen the congregational response. I feel like I'm missing some key something. And then you do all get a copy of the book also to take home with you at the training. So I think I'm missing one piece, but I can't remember what it is. But so those are some of the parts that come in the 18-month program. So yeah, right now it's only in Pennsylvania, just because that's where we have the funding to do it. But we would love to, you know, bring it to other parts of the world, other states. And so if your state is interested, if there's a number of folks in your region or whatever, definitely reach out to us and let us know, or you can come to Pennsylvania. You know, if you make it to the trainings in Pennsylvania, we'll still provide you with all the other stuff the rest of the way. So, but I know that's a bit of a commute for some people. And we really do want to expand it to other states. It's just, it's a bit of a, because it has so many components, it's a little bit pricey, and because we're only asking folks to really pay for the initial trainings, we have to get grant funding for the rest usually, or some other kind of external funding.
I know that people either probably have more questions, or questions might arise after we finish. And so Janelle, I wonder if you'd be willing to share your contact information in the chat. I put my contact information there. You're welcome to send me an email. But Janelle, if you wouldn't mind sharing also, then people can be in direct contact with you.
Sure. Yep. Yeah, and I think you already put this on here, but the book, streetlightsbook.com, and you can get it through Brethren Press or a lot of other places.
Is Janelle, is your contact information also listed on your slides?
You know, I probably did not put it on my slides, but I could add a slide, which would be
Yes, if you will add a slide and then send your presentation as a PDF, and we will post that on the website.
sure. Yeah, I'll be glad to do that. I will just say this. Let me just post one thing here too that might be of interest. So in Pennsylvania, we partnered with Eastern Mennonite University for some of the trainings. And so if you click that link, it'll take you to sort of a description of what the Churches Care program covers. But yeah, I'll put the information on a slide and send it out. And I really appreciate you guys with all of your questions. I'm sorry we feel like we didn't get to answer probably all the things that I would have liked to, but that happens to me sometimes. But yeah, feel free to reach out and definitely.
Janelle Bitikofer, thank you so much again for leading us in this webinar. Really appreciate your wisdom and insight and helping us better understand how congregations can support people who experience mental illness. And thanks to the Church of the Brethren, really appreciate you running tech for us once again, Stan. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate that you're here.
Yeah, definitely feel free to reach out to me. That's fine too. Yeah, it's great to have you all. Thank you so much. I appreciate your interest in this topic.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Janelle. And blessings on your ministries. And to all who have participated today, we recognize that this is an important topic and it's something that you care deeply about. And we are appreciative of it and we wish you well in your endeavors.
Yeah, God bless you all.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.